And first out is a very interesting young gentleman from Finland, Lauri Järvilehto. I'm trying rehearsing that all morning. And without further ado, actually, I will ask you up on stage to make your first presentation. So please give a warm hand.
Hello, everybody. My name is Lauri Järvilehto. I'm currently the CEO of a company called Lightyear. We make learning games. I've also founded another company called Academy of Philosophy that's done a lot of different kinds of research in learning in Finland. And for the last year or so, I had the privilege of working in the New Education Forum in Finland, which was a group of 31 people keyed in to find out how to reform Finnish education. Now, Finnish education, isn't that a kind of a buzzword these days? I don't know if it's like, around here, about a year ago, there was a pretty phenomenal piece on The Guardian, the British newspaper, on Finnish education. It started with something like, what on earth are people putting in the water supply of the Finnish people? I mean, what is going on in Finland? Because the Finnish educational system is phenomenal. And I kept reading the article and I was going like, wow, this sounds amazing. No homework. Kids they love school. They're completely like, their eyes shine when they come to school. And that's just fantastic. And as I read the piece on the Guardian, by the time I finished it, I just kept on thinking, where is this place called Finland? Because I want to move there. Okay, that being said, it may not come as a wonder that when I talk to people, I've talked about this a lot in the last 6 to 12 months around the world, about the educational reform in Finland. And people go, why on earth do you want to reform your education? Isn't your education already like the best in the world? And your kids love school and you're like, topping the scores in PISA. Even though we came down a little, we're still pretty great there. So why would you want to, fix something that's, when you read the pieces on Guardian or The Economist or Washington Post, it doesn't seem to need any fixing. The reason is, first of all, yes, it's true, Finnish education is phenomenal. It's amazing. But it's just not very good. Or to paraphrase this, we are at the top of the world, but the way we do education is pretty much the way everybody does education. If you pick up a randomly picked school anywhere in Finland, it'll look pretty much the same as a randomly picked school anywhere in the United States, Germany, Sweden, what have you. You'll have rows of kids sitting next to one another. You'll have a teacher going something like blah, 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 and then the kids are kind of zoning out, drawing Mickey Mouse in the books. Now that is, if you pick a randomly picked school. But if you go and see what the best are doing, you'll see something completely different. And this, I believe, is where the Finnish education system does excel. We have some phenomenally advanced teachers, some phenomenally advanced schools, and we have educational policymakers who are really leaning into the future. And we're putting together a curricular reform next year, and come fall 2016, we'll have a couple of things in terms of policy that are taking place in Finland that are pretty amazing. We're going to shift from subject-based learning to phenomenon-based learning. We're going to introduce things like coding into schools, into the official curriculum. We're going to shift from evaluating in this classical comparative way to more progressive ideas, and so on and so forth. But the problem, even here, is that even though we have pretty amazing policies, if you go to a randomly picked school a year from now or 2 years from now, you'll probably still see what you see today. And the question is, what do we do about this? With the New Education Forum, we ended up with a vision for the future of Finnish education. We want to make Finland into a country where everybody loves to learn. And you should have seen us, like 31 people, like policymakers from the ministries, CEOs of educational companies, principals of schools, and we spent about 3.5 hours arguing whether it's too much to say that you should love to learn. Whether, the word love is something, I don't know if you've seen any Finnish movies or like Aki Kaurismäki or something like that. But I mean, for a Finnish person, love is something that we take very, very seriously. So we debated for 3.5 hours whether we should, whether we can actually say that we should love learning. And I'm very happy that we ended up with the vision that we printed on the book that the booklet that we wrote from our work. We want to make Finland into a country where everybody loves to learn. We even managed to get this vision into the program of our new government that started working in June, although they did adjust it to making Finland into the country where everybody thinks learning is nice. But the thing is, the way I see it, unless we managed, and this is not just something that goes just for Finland, I think it goes for Sweden, it goes for everybody in the world. Unless we manage to come up with solutions that actually do generate love of learning, not just love of learning to get a degree, to get a great job, love of learning that lasts from the moment that you're born until the moment that you die. Learning that's lifelong learning, that's also life-wide learning. There was a fabulous talk given by Michael Levine, how do you pronounce this? Levine, the executive director of Joe and Ganscooney Foundation, the Sesame Street people in the United States. And Michael Levine gave a great talk at the Lego Idea Conference in Bellund last April. And he said that it's not enough to get to lifelong learning. I mean, we all know what lifelong learning is, right? But he said that we also need life-wide learning. And he displayed a pretty awesome graph where you have, the lifetime of a person from, 0 to about 80. But then also the 24 hours you have to use in a day. And now, on the graph, he showed formal education, which was this tiny, tiny little thing that comes up at when you're age 7, then lasts for about 12 years. Then if you go to university, it lasts for another 4 or 5 years, and then it's done. And you know what? We are not going to survive this world if this is the kind of learning that we have in place. We are not going to be able to work or act in a world that's changing as fast as it is right now. The world is changing exponentially. Things are happening right now. Technology is advancing at a speed that's completely, impossible to understand. The world has become crazy, to say the least. And the technological advances, and the scary bit is that I actually took a look at the kind of the big technological advances, or what the Harvard University business professor Clayton Christensen calls the disruptive innovations in the last 1,000 years. And in the last 1,000 years, change has happened faster all the time. Beginning from Gutenberg's printing press in 1450, the Industrial Revolution in 1762, and it just keeps on accelerating. And right now we live in a world where, Mark Zuckerberg just posted 2 days ago a photo of him wearing, the Samsung Gear VR. Do you know what's the Gear VR? Just raise your hand if you do. Wow, awesome. You guys rock. It's a virtual reality device that just made it into the market last week. And it's, I tried it out. I tried out a prototype about a year ago. And my first impression was like, this is scary. Because this is virtual reality that's real. So virtual reality, it just entered the market last week. It's going to change pretty much how we make computing, how we communicate, what have you. We're going to have, you can just march into a store now, you can buy a device and you can put it on your head and you're instantly going to be transported to another place on the planet. Or even just outside the planet. There was a demo where you can actually fly on the orbit and play that you're an astronaut. And it feels exactly like being there. How many of you guys have actually tried virtual reality? Wow. Well, you're definitely not a typical audience. Okay, but you know what I'm talking about, right? And this is just one of dozens and dozens of advances that are going to change our world in the next 5 to 10 years. And now if we still think about schooling as something where you learn the facts, where you learn the trade to get by in your everyday life, we're not going to be able to survive in this world, because by the time, the kids who start school now, by the time they graduate 12 years from now, by the time they graduate, whatever they've learned right now in school has likely become outdated. Another interesting aspect that really spawned a lot of discussion in our forum was that it's highly likely that this is the first age ever where if you come to a classroom, you'll have a situation where for the first time in the history of humankind, students actually know more than teachers. And that goes, without saying about all these new technologies. I'm a huge tech geek. I just came from the toilet and I noticed, I don't know, you guys if you went to the toilet down there, there's this little poster. I put it on Twitter, by the way, so the ladies can find it there as well. And it starts once upon a time in a galaxy far, far away where no man has gone before. And I was like, yeah. And it ends that this is because we want to be geek or something like that. So I'm a huge geek. I love everything, science fiction, everything science, everything technological. I love these new advances. I'm a future optimist. And I have absolutely no idea what is it with the kids these days. They have stuff like, Snapchat. How many of you guys actually figured out who on earth would want to use Snapchat? You need to tell me at the break, because I've been thinking about I installed it on my phone and I'm thinking Mark Zuckerberg wanted to pay these guys $3 billion to buy them and they wouldn't sell. These guys wouldn't sell their company for $3 billion. And it's about, I don't know, making short videos that immediately self-destruct. For me it sounds like something from Mission Impossible or something like that. This video will automatically self-destruct. Oh, you know what I'm talking about. So even for somebody as geeky and as techno-optimistic as myself, there are already things that I'm I'm seeing my own kids do that I just can't wrap my head around, and it's just going to get worse. It's just going to get a lot worse. If we think that we're in a position where we can just pass on the knowledge to the next generation and they can then learn and be quiet. In fact, as Ken Robinson, I had the pleasure of keynoting with Ken Robinson in Davos last June. And Ken Robinson said that it is you know who's Sir Ken Robinson, right? And he said that it is odd that we spend the first 5 years of a child's life teaching them to talk and to walk, and the next 12 to teach them to sit down and be quiet. But in a world that's static, in a world that's predictable, in a world that stays the same now and 10 years from now, that actually works. That's why we still have the old schooling systems in the place. That's why we have classrooms where we suppose that somebody can tell you the facts from the front of the classroom, and then that's going to generate learning. But it's not. Finland, actually our president told this last week, Finland is pretty much on the top of any top 10 lists in there. We score top, okay, Sweden is also, so this worked much better in Poland last week. but anyway, sorry about that. And my apologies to all Polish people in the audience or at the web stream. Yeah, but that's actually it's not just a catchphrase. There are dozens of different kinds of ways to score, like economic performance, innovation, educational performance, the PISA score, you got it. So we pretty much clock the top scores in a variety of these things. So we're pretty great, right? And this fall, we've had this kind of back and forth with our people. Like some people, the techno-optimists like myself, want to push forward, want to push these new ways of learning into the classroom. Other people want to push back. They don't want to change because, we've always done this and it's always worked so far, so why should we change? And all of a sudden, in the last 3 months, some switch has flipped in Finland. And I think one of the key reasons is that we're starting to get research in that's really, really scary about the way we learn. Now, I once more remind you, and I'm obviously a very kind of patriotic Finn, so Finland is great, right? We're amazing. And that being said, recent research, several research papers published in the last 3 months point out that in Finnish schools, 25% of all pupils suffer from a condition known as bore-out. You guys know what a bore-out is? Just raise your hand if you do. It's a pretty recently identified condition that's actually very similar to burnout. Everybody knows what burnout is. Being overstressed, being overburdened. Well, bore-out, it turns out, is a neurologically quite similar condition where equally as in a burnout state, people can't operate. But in this case, not because they're overburdened, but because they're underburdened, because they're bored to death. 25% of Finnish school children are bored to death, as pointed out in a research carried out by one of our leading educational professors. And that's scary. But that's nothing compared to another thing that surfaced this fall, and that's that almost every second, almost 50% of all Finnish students have absolutely no idea why they need to go to school. They just don't get it. And because they don't get it, they become cynical. They become disconnected. They lose motivation to study. And you know what happens next? If you have a quarter of kids who are bored to death, half of kids who have no sense of meaningfulness, have no idea why they're doing what they're doing, they're probably going to do something else the minute they get to do that. Which is pretty scary for the schooling systems, because if we want to get people to learn, we need to have them pay attention to what they're learning. And if they're completely disconnected, they're not going to pay attention. Their mind is going to wander. They're going to try out to do something else. This is actually likely to lead to an ADHD kind of behavior where you start fidgeting, you start running the table and stuff like that. And as Ken Robinson often points out, there is an ADHD epidemic going on there. But that has nothing to do with the kind of water that we drink or with the kind of food that we eat. It has everything to do with the fact that we are living in a world that's changing faster and faster. And one of these reasons, one of the effects of this change is that we've, unfortunately or fortunately, depending on where you stand, we've learned to become so much better at entertaining us than we were 10 years ago or 15 years ago. When I was a kid, entertainment would be go outside, play football, or wait until Tuesday evening to watch MacGyver on TV. You guys remember MacGyver, right? And that's about it. So basically, we spend a lot of time running and playing football, and then once a week we'd get MacGyver. Now, isn't that wonderful? Kids who voluntarily go outside and play football. Isn't that great? We want to get those times back. only there's a kind of psychological condition known as discounting, which means that we actually discount all the bad memories. The fact that actually life was really, really dull. And if life is dull and you go to an educational setting that's dull, it's kind of okay. You learn actually to put up with it. You learn the skill set to put up with it. Right. We all did. We can actually put up with an enormous amount of dullness just to get by. But our kids don't. And I'm not saying that that's a good thing. I'm just saying that that's the thing that we can do absolutely nothing about. Well, we can actually. There is one way to make sure that our children learn to survive in a dull environment. We need to outlaw smartphones from everybody under the age of 12. We need to make it, basically that if you see a kid who's under 12 years old using a smartphone, you need to throw their parents to jail for a year. That'll do the trick. But we're probably not going to be able to do that. And that means that we have an ever-widening attention gap between how the everyday life goes, how it entertains us, how it gives us this, all of a sudden we don't need to wait till Tuesday evening to watch MacGyver, we have Netflix. And this is a competition between the rest of the life and the school. And the school needs to up its game. So how do we do this? We visited Boston, Harvard University, MIT, several other interesting places with the Educational Forum last February. And during that visit, the President Emeritus of Lego Education, Stephen Turnipseed, gave us a very inspiring talk. And Mr. Turnipseed pointed out that there is this huge kind of like tug and pull between these educational trends. Like, should we go for e-learning or flipped classroom or project-based learning? And now, Finland, the magical education land, is going to phenomenon-based learning. So let's everybody go for phenomenon-based learning now, immediately, okay? When we get out of the door, phenomenon-based learning it is, okay? No. Mr. Turnipseed pointed out that if we jump into one of these trendy bandwagons, we're not going to make much progress. Because the thing is, none of these things work perfectly. Even though, the old-fashioned thing doesn't work perfectly, none of these individual solutions works perfectly either. And I have research to boot that. What we need to do is that instead of jumping into one single educational bandwagon, we need to jump into many. We need to take a look at what actually works in a world that's configured as ours does, in a world that is constantly better at entertaining kids, that's constantly giving you more of these kind of like intrinsic motivation, these whoa moments. And we need to look into those things like flipped classrooms, like e-learning, like game learning, project-based learning. There's a whole wonderland, whole gamut of these things out there. Let's take a look at them. Let's try to employ them. Let's put them to work. And that's what the future of the school is going to look like. And there's one thing we need to change. I'll say this and then I'll stop. We need lifelong, life-wide learning. And the thing we need to change is that right now, as our famous philosopher in Finland, Esa Saarinen, often says, the world is full of people who love to learn, who are enthusiastic, whose fires light up whenever they set themselves to do something. Right now, unfortunately, the majority of them are under 7 years old. This we need to change. Thank you very much.
Thanks ever so much, Larry. Great speech. I have a quick comment from our panel, I hope. How about Jan Hylén, please? Just briefly introduce yourself and
right. Jan Hylén. I call myself educational analyst. Been working in the Ministry of Education and the National Agency for Education in Sweden for many years, but since 10 years or so I'm independent. Thanks a lot for a great speech. Actually, I was in Finland yesterday, in Helsinki, discussing and giving a talk to the vocational education part of the Finnish education sector. And what we discussed there is, I think Finland very much is doing the right thing. I mean, why fix something that is not broken? As you point out, perhaps because it's having a risk of being obsolete. And you're not the only country doing this. There are other countries as well, like New Zealand, Singapore, Ireland. Norway have also had a big research round and are now discussing whether this should have effects on their policy or not. We are not in Sweden. We discuss whether we should start the grading in age 4 or class 4 or class 6. I mean, that's not the kind of issues that will put the Swedish education system up front again. What you're also doing, I think, and very rightly so, is that you're looking much more at competences, broader competences, rather than just subject-based learning. Again, something that other countries are doing as well, looking at different kinds of critical thinking skills, analytical skills, but also social skills, emotional skills that are very much affecting academic achievement and that are very needed in the world that we see coming to us. Kids starting school today, they will retire around 2075. Imagine what the world looks like then. Okay, I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Yeah, we'll get back to that. Thank you, John. Just a short comment also from Carl Heath.
Thank you. Carl Heath, I work at the Interactive Institute, a state-run research institute in interaction design and applied ICT. Thank you for a super interesting morning talk. I have two thoughts from your talk to the Swedish educational system that I've sort of have a hard time wrapping my head around. The first one is, how do we create and design a process where we can redesign the educational system without scaring those in the system afraid of change, and at the same time following the speed of change in the rest of society? How do we do that? I don't know. But it's one of the sort of hard nuts to crack, I think. The second one is, how do we design a system where it's okay to fail? We have designed systems based on security. We take taxpayers' money to design an educational system, and we ask of the system to use that money very wisely, which means we minimize risk. But by minimizing risk, we also minimize the momentum and possibility to innovate. And we minimize risk of failure, but we need failure a lot, as you state. And then we can ask ourselves, how do we design a system where we can fail fast and often and meaningful? And I don't have an answer to how we change the whole system to that either, but it's a system for all of us to cope with. Thank you.